One of the things that AI is best at is taking a bunch of information, whether that is in a bucket or on a website, and processing it and allowing you to query it. Today, I'm here with Foka from LiquidMetal, who is showing a really cool approach to taking information for your site, whether it's your company or whatever your corporate infrastructure that you're running, and making it available powered by AI. So thanks for hopping on the call here. Tell us a little bit about yourself and LiquidMetal.
Definitely, yeah. Thank you for having us. Yeah, I'm Foka. I'm part of the team at LiquidMetal. We are a company that's building a bunch of cool AI products, and we're actually building it all on Cloudflare. So the first product that we're launching is our product that we call Smart Buckets, which is effectively an S3 compatible bucket or R2, right? It's running on top of R2. And then we enhance it with what we call an AI layer. So basically every document or every file that you put in there, we call it AI decomposition. So we deconstruct the file and then index it into a bunch of AI usable data stores and then make that searchable through a convenient API and SDK. And I can actually show you a little bit of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll show you the more interesting part, or I think it's the more interesting part is the UI, which is over here. So this is one of our test environments, and this is where we have a smart bucket running. And you can run things through here, let's say like show me all my PDFs. And this is actually running an AI agent in the background that goes and transforms that query and goes and sorts all the metadata that we have on those files. And
so the idea is like, it's not just like text information or whatever. Like PDFs are kind of this like complicated thing to parse,
right?
Whatever it may be, right? All your company information, you guys are taking and processing all of it and making it available via this sort of single AI query, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. And so if you think about a PDF, what is a PDF really, right? It's a document that contains text, images, tables, metadata. We take that all out of the PDF and then chunk it up into chunks and various other things like entity relationship extractions and information extraction. We extract the images and then run the images through image models and extract the data from that and index that all in our metadata databases. And then when you run queries here, you can use that information to talk to it through natural language. And so one of the things you can do, all my PDFs is obviously a bit of a simple thing that you could probably do with a regular filter, but you could run things like all my PDFs with PII. We run PII models on it as well.
Cool.
Specifically emails. Actually don't know if that information is in my smart bucket here, but we'll know once the results come back.
And this, so like this query here, I mean, it is like an AI query, right? It's not just like it's smart enough to kind of decompose that different parts. So like
that's
file type is PDF. Specifically, we're looking for PII. Even more specifically, we're looking for emails. So it's pretty cool.
That's right. Yeah. It basically runs, it's a multi-agent structure in the background that decomposes this question into all its sub-questions and runs those through the various data stores that we have. And then you can see the information, right? Like, so we've got 8 PDFs that actually have emails, and then you can ask questions about this particular PDF. You can summarize it. And I think that, like, this is the more compelling UI demo, obviously, but where the real power is ultimately in the APIs and the SDKs. Because every agent that anybody builds, and we've talked to like hundreds of people that do this, you start with building an indexing pipeline. And you can do that really simple, as in like embed some data, extract the data from a PDF, like the text, embed it, and then push it into, for example, Vectorize, which is good for like, that demo on your laptop. It's really cute, but then you go to like a production system, it's like, okay, it's a little bit more complex than that. And so building a pipeline like this would take you weeks or months. And so what we're saying is like, don't do that. Just upload it into this smart R2 bucket that we've built.
Yeah. And
then you can use it. And then so one example of that over here, for example, is this is the Cloudflare. I'll make my screen a little bit bigger here. Oop, that's perhaps a tiny bit too big. This is the Cloudflare agent framework, right? Mm-hmm. And so you guys have built a really cool framework that allows you to very quickly build agents, and then you can extend those with tools. And so what I've done here is we've got a couple tools that I've defined which is one that lets you search your files in your smart bucket, what we just saw. Then we have one which we call chunk search, which is effectively the actual replacement for your RAG pipeline. And so you input a query, and then it gives you back a ranked list of chunks that are most relevant to that input query.
Right.
And we do that through our SDK here, right? So we do a client.chunksearch.create, and then we have the input query. And so now the agent here can search through anything in that smart bucket. And I think the really cool part is that we've started out with PDFs, but we've been adding substantially more file formats to it. So right now we do PDFs, we do text, we do audio, we do images, we're working on video. And so if you have any data that your AI needs to be aware of, you upload it into this bucket. We take care of all the transcription and formatting and running AI models on top of it. And then you can get to the real cool part, or the thing that I think is a lot more fun, which is like building the AI agent. And you can get there in minutes rather than, say, spend 6 months on building it yourself.
And you guys also, I imagine, like handle. I mean, I've built RAG pipelines, and I did some stuff on our YouTube in regards to building the RAG pipeline. And like you kind of said, the demo is like really easy to understand locally. But then, like, what happens if things change, or you remove, if you remove something from the bucket, and like that whole pipeline part, that is the part that's harder to do, right? I'm assuming
that is the really hard part. And so one of the things we've done on our platform, and anything we build, it has versioning built in. So if you and I are building with a smart bucket, we can very easily create a copy of like production data, run some local tests on it, promote it to production, or you can have 15 different branches that are all working off the same data. So as an individual developer, you get basically a live system to work on without actually messing up the live system itself. And I think that's the real power too. It's like the ability to version everything in here. And like you say, like the ability to just like when we index data, I think it goes into something like last count, there's like something like 24 different data stores, right? And so then if you want to delete data, you got to purge it. You got to remove it everywhere. And now you got 15 different versions of those 24 data stores that are running. So all that overhead, you don't have to worry about. It's just a simple API call away, and then you can use it yourself.
Yeah, no, that's super cool. And the integration with the agents framework is really cool. We just did our Agents 101 video, which went out a couple days ago. And we're excited to see people build with that. But having all of your documents available with just like a single tool and just like a couple API calls away, it's really interesting. Yeah, really cool. What's the? I'm not sure if what you just talked about is necessarily the hardest one, but what was the? Maybe it is. What is the hardest technical problem you guys solved to get this all working end to end? In my mind, I was like, PDFs seem hard, but like maybe that's not even the that's not even the hardest thing. I don't know.
I think like PDFs are, it's a little trick, right? And especially like I think the harder part, extracting the text out of PDF right now is table stakes, right? That you've got so many great libraries for that do that for you. Same is kind of true for audio and image extraction. There's just wonderful models or libraries that do that for you. I think the hard part, the hardest technical problem that we have to solve with this is the ability to string it all together, and then the ability to keep track of the versions within those systems and retrieving the information in reasonable time. I think that's one of the latency is obviously really important, right? Because this is going to power your agent, and the latency of the LLM itself is already quite long, and so anything you add on top of that is just bad. And so what we really tried to focus on was get this to like a second or 2 second max response time. And I think the other thing is that one of the things we focused on is the scalability. And so the way that the platform is designed, whether you have 5 PDFs in there, or I think I had like 60 of them in there, or you have 5,000 PDFs in there and 1,000 audio files, doesn't really add a ton of overhead in terms of latency when you do your retrieval request. And I think that's the real power too, which is like just super blazingly fast, low latency responses.
I mean, latency is like the AI killer, right? And
it is, yeah,
for sure. It's really painful. So you mentioned at the beginning, and you kind of mentioned it throughout, like you guys are using Cloudflare throughout the stack. It sounds like it's built on R2. What initially made you choose to go all in on Cloudflare?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we came from a different company, and we were kind of building something like Cloudflare, and eventually decided that wasn't the right path for us. We pulled the plug out of that and restarted with a core group and started building this. And we were looking for that replacement. And Cloudflare has a really great suite of developer tools. It's you got durable objects, which are freaking awesome. The workers themselves, and then just R2 and D1. It's a very complete stack, and so that was one of the reasons we looked at Cloudflare. The second reason that I touched on earlier is the latency, right? The ability to run really close to the end user. We believe is going to be one of the most important things with these agents. Like the latency with models, while it will improve, and there's like these platforms like Sambanova and Grok to do like really fast inference responses. That is great, but I think we also still need to make sure that we're really close to the end user, and that's one of the things that Cloudflare can provide us. And so that's one of the reasons we went with Cloudflare as well.
So you mentioned, let's see, you said workers, durable objects, R2, D1. I guess of all of those, which do you find kind of the most compelling? We kind of cover all of it on this YouTube channel. We cover everything, right? Like all that stuff. But is there one? Is it durable objects? You said they're freaking awesome.
Yeah, I think durable objects are awesome. I think that the reason that I personally like durable objects so much is so this is the first product that we're launching as a company. We're on a path to make a lot of smart products. So think about like Smart SQL, Smart KV, where the ability to query is all in natural language, allowing then agents to more easily access that data. But ultimately what we want to build too is a platform on which you can build agents. And I think the durable objects are very well suited to take that space for us, to build the agents on top of them. The built-in storage allows you to have working memory for the agent itself. You have the storage and the compute sitting basically next to each other, which is awesome. They sit super close to the end user, which is great for the end user latency. And then we can tie them in with all these AI models. So that makes them very well suited there. So I think that's one of my favorite products that I think we'll be using a lot here when we build out our platform to allow users to build agents on top of us and by extension on top of Cloudflare.
Yeah, I think we see people sometimes kind of struggle with like what durable objects are, or kind of like how to get up and running with them. But I think the stuff you mentioned about storage living side by side with compute and everything is just sort of there available to you, I think is a pretty compelling. It's one of those things that maybe you don't. Yeah, go ahead.
The search you saw on the UI there, that's a durable object, right? Like it's cool. It's doing a search and then it stores the search results on the durable objects for paginated retrieval and summarization and chatting. Like all that information just lives on that durable object, really close to the end user. And so the next follow up questions are relatively easy then to serve.
And then you guys, so obviously R2 you mentioned, like the store, I'm assuming like the storage itself is probably built on R2, right?
Yeah.
How about like D1? What's your usage of D1 look like?
Yeah, there's a ton of metadata that we extract, right? And that needs a place to sit. We've also built a graph database using D1.
Oh, wow.
We're only going single layer graph here, so it's a relatively simple graph structure there for entity relationship extraction within these extracted data components. So that's what powers D1 as well. And ultimately all the retrieval is really like a bunch of D1 queries. And this is what I think allows us to provide fast responses on these queries is we're performing our AI decomposition up front. Mm-hmm. Everything you put in there is immediately indexed, and then ultimately the retrieval is just a bunch of queries that runs and get the relevant information from all the related objects on D1 from like a SQL perspective.
So you're doing a bunch of kind of like compute ahead of time so that
that's right.
The actual that's super cool, and it makes it, I'm sure, fast, but also it's probably a little bit easier to reason about if all this stuff is kind of done ahead of time, and it's like what your queries are going to look like, and It's the like I think when you're building AI, a lot, or
agentic AI, a lot of what you're doing is hiding the latency. And so you're trying to figure out, okay, what can I do pre-computed up front to avoid showing that latency to the end user? And so one of the things we do, so we call this smart buckets, right? It's all that AI decomposition we're doing that for free. It's what you ultimately will pay for is the queries against it. So we highly discourage people also to use this as regular storage because one, it would cost us a ton, and it's just not performant in that sense, right? Like putting a new object in here will set off this whole chain that does all these things to it.
Interesting.
And then eventually it will be available there. But yeah, ultimately it's a regular R2 bucket in the backend, and then a lot of D1 data that feeds the information to the AI.
Is there anything on the Cloudflare side, and we'll switch gears here in a second, but just last thing on Cloudflare, is there anything in terms of like other products in the developer, I guess, product suite that you guys are interested in that you haven't had a chance to play with yet?
I don't think we've not played with, like when we started out doing this, it was like, okay, how much of this can we do on Cloudflare? Like literally the goal was do all of it on Cloudflare. And so I think from the developer suite, we've used everything, and I think we've used more than that is publicly available at this point. We've had a couple of internal betas that we've been kicking around, and what I personally, I think, be interested in is something that's not out yet that I know you guys talked publicly about is the containerized workloads. There's certain things here that require maybe more than 30 seconds of compute time, or maybe more than 128 megs of memory. Yeah. And so I think that's where, and there's ways around it, right? You could stream data or you could do things, but like there are things that are easier to do with containers. So that would be an interesting one that we'd love to play with. Yeah, I think there's things that what we're playing with, and again, I'm not sure how much of this is public, is different ways of interacting with your AI models on like more of a queue or batch basis, which is really good for this internal, like when you upload data to a smart bucket, it triggers all this processing, but we're not very latency sensitive on that data. Like if that takes a couple of minutes, that's totally fine, right? We're super latency sensitive on the front end, but in the back end, it's like, yeah, okay, let's do a batch, let's index that information. That's all good. So there's things there that I think are interesting, where also the Cloudflare architecture, possibly running that in different places where the load is less, or where it's maybe cheaper to run because it's nighttime at the moment, or providing we're allowed to do so with various like data regulations and whatnot. But I think there's interesting pieces there that we'd love to play with if you guys ever supported it.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting like distinction. I mean, all the stuff that we've done, at least on this channel where we sort of educate people on like building with AI, we sort of approach it from like just RAG, for instance. Like document comes in, let's go and do a bunch of stuff to it, right? Like computationally expensive stuff like generating vectors and all of that stuff. And we're sort of doing it like the one sort of adjustment we made versus like the V1 of us shipping RAG to, I guess, sort of V1.1 of just like how we even just kind of reason about it in our head, right? Is, well, okay, let's switch to workflows and then like go and do all that stuff in the background. Because there is an interesting kind of, as you mentioned, like what is latency sensitive and what is not. So I think that's super interesting. And kind of goes into, the question I would kind of ask you. A lot of people building with AI, how do I say this? Like it's like hobbyist sort of stuff, right? It's very impressive to get like a model and do the chat thing because they're so smart. Even like the sort of mediocre models are like pretty impressive, right? But when it comes to actually building like the stuff that you're talking about, which is like a full product that serves like a real business use case, I think that's very different than like a chat UI, right? Like it's totally different sort of thing. What sort of advice would you give to developers who are in that kind of what we talked about, the hobbyist kind of toy demo-y sort of stage, wanting to move into building, production AI apps? So I assume you guys are going out and you're talking to companies who have like real requirements that like, whether that's like data privacy or if it's just like SLOs or stuff like whatever it may be, right? Like, how do you sort of bridge that gap between like hobby and production? What advice would you give to developers building that sort of stuff today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think so. This is one of these is like a very personal opinion, which is I'm if we're all building chat apps, I think chat is one of the worst ways of interacting with anything, right? Like unless you really need text heavy interaction, chat's probably not the way to go. I forgot if it was Uber or Lyft or whoever. It was like you can now chat and order an Uber. It's like, yeah, but there used to be a button, right? and that did the same thing. So
yeah.
So I think what I think is interesting to look at is like these underlying use cases. And one of the things we believe in at LiquidMetal is that ultimately every app will have an AI component. Whether or not you see that or not is a different question. And so kind of comes back to that search UI that we have here, which is like, you wouldn't imagine that there's a supervisor agent and, I don't know, 15 agents running underneath that are doing a whole bunch of things and that are then being combined into a result. But there is, right? And I think that's what I think is interesting. So if you're looking at cases you want to solve, I would get out of that chat space and start looking at business and process optimization and trying to figure out if you can, improve business workflows. Kind of like RPA promised us when was that, like the early thousands or whenever that really was up and coming. But now you can really do it with these models. So I think that's, if you get out of that, you're starting to get building more real case use cases and provide real value for businesses. I think that's one. And as an extension there, I'm personally really interested in these like multi-agentic systems, because I think what you'll find if you start building chat applications, or if you build like a cute little demo on your laptop, often it's a single LLM interaction. And what we found building these systems is that you can get these systems pretty smart, but ultimately the walls that you're going to hit is just the size of the model. And you can scale up, right? You can start with a 7 billion parameter model and it's working fine. And then, okay, now it's got to do like 2 or 3 different things. Okay, we go to a 70 billion parameter model. Mm-hmm. So literally the workflow we went through when we built this is we kept increasing the model size up into the point where we're talking to this 500 and whatever billion parameter model, and it was still kind of shitty. And so what we did was ultimately break that up, and that's something where the multi-agentic comes in. It's like once you create these like specialized sub-agents or multi-agentic workflows, you can get much more specialized. And as a whole, you can basically start stacking these models on top of each other. You can have a 70 billion parameter model doing this and another 70 doing this. And so the set of billion parameters that you end up using is much larger, and the output is much more reliant. And so if you wanted to build like real enterprise use cases, I think that's the way to look into and seeing if you can build, starting out with just a simple supervisor that coordinates 1 or 2 agents, but that's the real value I think that companies are going to be looking into. And so if you want to step out of that hobby space, I think that's where you kind of have to start looking yourself.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. I think, and just to go back, we'll talk about agents. So I think we need to kind of cover that in greater detail here in a sec. But, talking about like not having AI solve things that are not just chat, like real business problems. I mean, a great example I think you mentioned like at the beginning of us talking was like you guys are processing audio or you're doing PDFs, right? And like, I don't know what you guys are using for that, but it's like on the audio side, I mean, transcribing audio was like not super easy, 5 years ago. And now it's like you have Whisper or stuff like that, and it's incredible, right? Like on my meetings, like I'll put a Google Meet bot in there or whatever, like a product that will just like very accurately transcribe all the audio coming out of that. And like, every company could probably use that if they're recording meetings or whatever. And that was like a really difficult problem a couple years ago that's just been totally changed. I imagine, again, I don't know what you guys are using for PDFs, but just like parsing stuff like that and converting it into Markdown is like also not super easy, a couple years ago, right? So there's just these things that have been totally changed.
PDFs are somewhat remarkably still pretty annoying. I know that we looked and like the basic stuff like extracting text is really easy.
Yeah.
You know, there's a ton of great libraries for it. But once you start looking at like embedded images and embedded tables and metadata is structured so it's not that hard,
Right.
I believe. But like I know that we looked into extracting images from PDFs, and it's actually, it's not great. It's really hard. And then this is actually where it is a little bit harder sometimes developing pieces on Cloudflare because some of the more, the node packages aren't all supported.
Right.
And so you're kind of trying to like, there might be a really easy package, but you want to make sure that it works on this worker. Ultimately, it ends up being faster, but it takes a little bit more like engineering hours to get that going and looking into that. So, but yeah, for sure, there's like, it's surprising that like things that were really, really hard before, like audio, like you said, I mean, I don't know how many lines of codes our engineers wrote for that, but it wasn't much. I think it was like an API call and, add the data in there and basically you're done. And then the PDF ends up being like lines and lines of code to kind of like, get the same information out there. And I think also that's like one of the things that if you're asking like, okay, what should people be focusing on, right? Like, I think you can imagine that things like audio transcription, video transcription, and other ways of like extracting information out of data are going to get better, and you're just going to get like a tool for it that does it for you. Kind of the same way that we're saying like, hey, stop building RAG pipelines, just use this tool. Mm-hmm. And so I think you're going to move higher and higher up in that hierarchy, ultimately leading to actually building agents themselves, or AGI, dare I say it. And focus on that, right? I think that's where a lot of value is.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about agents. I know you mentioned some of the stuff under the hood you all are using. Like, let's take the search example. So I think if you were building this a couple years ago, you probably would have built like a very complicated search component where to me, one of the best examples, I think probably still this is like on my Mac in Finder. I can set the extension, I can set the date. I mean, it's not super discoverable, but like it is there, right? Where like I can sort of decompose my search into these different parameters. But now you all have built something where it can sort of intelligently figure out all that stuff out. I would have guessed that you probably would have just used some basic, I don't know, like chat-y sort of thing, but you're using agents for that. Without kind of, I guess, telling us too much about the secret sauce if you don't want to, like what does that process kind of look like? Why did you guys go that route, and sort of how do you think about agents based on that experience?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons we went with agents is because we want this to be powered by agents, right? We want this to, and we actually build it. We build an MCP server for this so you can hook it into Claude, and now Claude has all your information, right? Agents or LLMs are all text-based. And so, they could do SQL and you can have them, but now you're putting the difficulty back on the user. Whereas if the user could just do any text input and then the system figures it out, that's much easier from like an LLM perspective. So that's one of the reasons we went with agents. Why we went with the modular multi-agent approach here. Like I said, we kind of ran out of, it just stopped. It was just not reliable. And I think this is what a lot of people see that when they're building agents is that you can get it up to a point where you're somewhat reliable, but for the really complex stuff, having everything in a single prompt is just, it gets really, really messy. And you fix one thing and then it messes up the other thing, and then you fix that and then that breaks the output for something else. And so that's why we ended up going with the multi-agent stuff, and I think the flexibility of it all, right? Like the agent can just figure out and find everything. And honestly, so when you're thinking about what it does, right? Like we have a supervisor that kind of breaks it up into sub questions that are more suitable for the sub agents, and then the sub agents run all these queries. And
can you give us an example of a sub? You don't have to tell us all the sub questions. What's one example of a sub question? Yeah,
so if you look at for example, we looked at show me all my PDFs with PII, right? Yeah. So there's actually two questions in there. There's a show me all my PDFs and show me everything with PII, and then you have to take the intersection of the two and return that to the user. And so those are two separate questions that you can run. But now you can go much deeper too, which is show me all my PDFs with PII, specifically email, that contain pictures of cats that do not talk about dogs. Kind of a silly example, right? But like, I forgot what I said exactly, but you can break that up into 5 or 6 different questions where you say like, okay, show me all PDFs with pictures of cats. So it's okay, that's one. Show me one with all PII. Show me one with all the emails. Show me one that does not talk about dogs. And then you kind of have to figure out how you intersect and combine those data sets to get the final result.
The supervisor, I think a lot of people are thinking, like we have our agents framework that we're building. A lot of people are thinking how to sort of, it goes back kind of almost back to the chat thing we talked about, which is like how do people sort of evolve past that initial, like they learned that, okay, cool, I can talk to this, LLM in my API. That's awesome. But then when it comes to like multi-agent stuff, so that's something we talked about in our agents framework, this video that I did that just went out, is like, this can also coordinate between multiple agents. That's something we want to kind of explore in like tutorial content in the future. But an example of that, what you all are talking about, what you built is like, I give it this potentially like, I don't know, 5, 6, 50 parameter thing, and it's going to go and decompose that into like, the prompt is sort of like, what are the individual questions here? And then it also kind of, I would assume, takes all the sort of responses back and like kind of, makes something that makes sense out of it, right? So that's pretty interesting. Because I would imagine like the prompt for, if you did that all in one query, kind of what you were doing ahead of time or like at the beginning, I could see that easily just running out of.
It gets really like, and it's not even the sizing problem there, right? That's the complexity is mostly, I think, what you run out to. Yeah. Which is like, like I said, you have like these 15, 20, 30 underlying database structures like vector databases and graph databases and and regular SQL databases. The agent at that point would have to have the understanding of all of them and exactly how to combine all of that, and then not screw up combining all of that. And so if you break it up into smaller pieces where sub-agents know about maybe one data set, or they know about one particular table or one particular thing that they're doing, and just know how to return that, and then you combine it later on, because the combination is actually relatively straightforward. But the ability to like really focus on a single thing, the reliability just shoots up, and I think that's really where you really start.
Yeah, I heard someone kind of describe agents as like interns recently, and it's kind of a funny like way to think about what you're talking about. Is like, well, a senior engineer might like have the sort of mental model of all of those tables you're talking about in their head. But like an intern might be better suited to just understand one, right? You can imagine they went out and built that. That was like their sort of keystone intern project where they went out and built this table. They understand that one piece, right? So they can talk about it, but can they like kind of keep all this stuff in their head? Well, maybe not yet. So that's
and the funny thing actually is which is one of the reasons why we call it the supervisor, right? It's the supervisory agent that does all the other that coordinates the interns in a way. And the funny thing is that the supervisor itself knows nothing about the underlying data structures. It just knows that there is a data structure that has information. How to retrieve that's up to the intern, basically. And then says, like, well, I found 50 objects in this thing, or I found 50, lines of information. Yeah, and then the supervisor is like, okay, great, I'll add that to my knowledge about the system. And then all the other interns come back with their information, and then the supervisor's looking at it, it's like, well, this is the query I'm trying to solve. This is the information I have. Here's the end result. That's kind of how we did it, and how a lot of supervisory agent structures work.
I mean, it's just like such a cool time to build stuff right now, right? And you hear people like like you guys, for instance, going out and actually building stuff and learning these lessons. And if someone is newer to AI development, that's like the kind of thing that can give them a big head start. Is they see companies like you guys who are building real production stuff and learning those lessons out of necessity, which I think is
you don't have to make the mistakes we make. And again, that's one of the reasons why we built this RAG pipeline too, and why we say like it is kind of everybody we talk to is like, what do you do first? Well, I clean all my data, I index it into my vector store, and then I like realized that wasn't enough, and then I started extracting this information, I started doing that, and we're like, don't. Just don't do that. Go build the fun stuff. Like, I really believe that agent building is the fun stuff. It's where the magic happens, and where, you know, I'm not an engineer, but I can vibe code some stuff together. Like, I can build like little apps with this. I can build like little agents with it, and I think that's just really cool. And that's like an amazing time to be alive, that you just kind of yell at an LLM and it just builds it for you.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that the underlying technologies and stuff in it aren't still like really, really difficult. Because, and this is, I think, what a lot of people forget, it's software engineering.
Right.
Building agents is software engineering. And once you figure that out, it's like, oh, okay, you know.
You still have to know all the other stuff. But
you still have to know all the other stuff.
it just surfaces in different ways.
Yeah,
right.
For sure.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, this is awesome. I learned a lot myself. I enjoyed it. And so what's kind of what's the call to action for people to check out LiquidMetal? Where should they go, and what would you like them to check out?
Yeah, go to our website, sign up if you want access. We're literally, I think we're either launching today or we're launching on Monday for the real sign up, so you can start having your accounts.
Nice.
We'll give you 10 gigs of free storage, and then I think it's 2 million tokens that you can use a month, and stop building your own rack pipelines. Just start using this and build your AI agents on us and on Cloudflare, and, you know, have fun with it, because it's going to change your life. Like, going from building 6 months of pipeline to 1 line of SDK code is going to be it's going to be amazing.
Yeah. Oh, that is. I mean, how many people are going to get bogged down in just that first part? Right? They're like, I have all this data, and I want to start building.
Right?
This. Yeah, and they give up.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah.
Don't give up.
Don't give up.
Use this instead, and go build your AI agent and vibe code it together, for all I care. But, you know, I think there's a lot of possibilities here that you can do, and we're excited to see what people think. You know, and for us, this is the start. Like I said, we're building a platform ultimately to build agents, and we're going to make pretty much every Cloudflare product smart and some more, and allow people to use them in their agentic workflows. And we're excited to see what people build with this. So yeah.